Well, hello and welcome everyone to our webinar on Deciphering the DNS. I'm Michael Lewis, auDA's Industry Relations Manager. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land I'm coming to you from today, the original home of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Please note the session is being recorded. Today we're pleased to be sharing with you a paper by the Cyber Security Cooperative Research Centre, produced with support from auDA. The title of the paper is Deciphering the DNS, How It Works and Why It's Critical. We'll post a link to the paper in the chat shortly, and we'll also email it around to everyone at the end of the session. But first, I'd like to hand over to auDA CEO Reserach Sinclair to introduce the paper and today's speakers. Before we do though, just a reminder that we will be taking questions, so feel free to put them in the Zoom Q&A tab and we'll take them towards the end. Reserach, over to you.
Terrific. Thanks, Mike, and welcome to everyone joining us today. We're really pleased to be gathering together to launch the Cyber Security CRC's great new report that was produced with our support and focuses on the DNS. The .au DNS is over 36 years old, but it was only last year that it was designated as Australian critical infrastructure under the Commonwealth Security of Critical Infrastructure Act 2018. This designation, of course, is in recognition of the country's reliance on a trusted and secure DNS for the operation of government services, schools, medical services, e-commerce, social connections, and much, much more. On average, the AU DNS handles more than 30,000 queries per second. Again, 30,000 queries per second. These queries are from people around the world connecting to Australian websites, using social media and platforms to access Australian-based content, or sending emails. And of course, the recent pandemic highlighted to all of us the necessity of the DNS. We saw a drastic increase in businesses moving online, rapid digitisation of government services, and the publication of very timely and important health information. And for many months, the internet was the only means of social interaction. Without the DNS, these services and activities would not have been possible. Without a secure DNS, these services would not be reliable. Cyber security, in the context of the domain name system, means ensuring users can use the internet easily and trust that when they type in health.gov.au, that the domain name system will, in a fraction of a second, direct them to the Federal Health Department's website. Without this ease and trust, with the risk of being directed to incorrect websites, it would become much harder for users to engage with services online. So like all critical infrastructure assets, the DNS and auDA remain the target of cyber attacks, and auDA takes steps to secure our infrastructure and keep our supply chain secure. Beyond this, though, we need to protect the open and free nature of the internet. auDA is a champion of the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance, where government, industry, and civil society have an equal say. This model helps to ensure that undue influence isn't given to governments that may want to suppress free speech or drive other agendas. This model of governance, however, is under threat, and we hope that this paper will drive further conversation about the essential nature of the DNS and the importance of protecting how it is governed and operates. Today, very happily, I'm joined by two experts in the cyber world to discuss this and the paper further. The first is Rachel Falk, the CEO of the Cyber Security Cooperative Research Centre. Rachel is one of Australia's leading executives working at the intersection of Australia's cyber security, governance and policy interests. As Chief Executive Officer of the Cyber Security CRC since 2018, she leads a cutting-edge program to develop innovative and practical cybersecurity solutions through collaborations between government, industry, and research institutions. Our second expert is auDA's own Internet Governance and Policy Director, Jordan Carter. Jordan joined auDA in July 2022, following 19 years at Internet NZ, including 9 as its Chief Executive Officer. He has extensive experience in international internet governance and the domain name system. auDA is really pleased to have his expertise boosting our already strong policy outreach team. Thank you both for joining us today. I'll now pass to Rachel to explain the importance and impact of the paper before Jordan shares with us the highlights. We'll be happy to take your questions after this, so please put them in the Zoom Q&A tab. Rachel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Rosemary, and thank you for having me. I'm coming to you today from Ngunnawal land, and I'd like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people who may be part of this webinar and the traditional owners of our land here in the ACT. Thank you very much for having me back at auDA. Some of you may know I did do a brief stint at auDA sort of 5 years ago. I even attended one ICANN, so I pretty well think that I can safely say I'm, a tiny bit of auDA's history. But thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of the panel with you and Jordan. We were delighted, my staff member particularly who did the bulk of this report, we were delighted to do this report for auDA and for the broader community. And it is really terribly important because if you like, the architecture of the internet from the beginning of typing a domain name in to when it's resolved and you get the website you want and everything in between, it's sort of the silent plumbing, but the very important plumbing of the internet. And to your point, Rosemary, we all rely heavily on a connected world. If we were plunged back into, say, 1985, we would have no internet. We would be doing all our shopping in regular shops. There would be no Google. You would have had an ATM, so you would have had access to some ready cash. But it really was a very different world. And in this paper, what we wanted to do and work on with auDA was sort of an introduction to what the DNS is. And to Rosemary, to your point, it is now designated under the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, which is the major amendments passed last year. So that's the underpinnings of the DNS. But what we do in this paper is we really wanted to have a bit of a primer, if you like, on a few things. So, what is a domain name? What do the domain levels mean? What does the DNS actually do as resolving? Why do we have the DNS? And interestingly, many of you probably know, if we didn't have domain names as we know it, we'd have to remember strings of numbers. And I think in the world of mobile phones, nobody remembers phone numbers anymore. So imagine having to remember numbers of websites, but the dynamic addresses change, which means you might have a number today, but a different number tomorrow. So it makes it much easier for you to go type in rachelscakes.com.au and you know where you can go with that. So it's a really important part of the internet plumbing. DNS, we seek to explain what the DNS is, that it's effectively like the telephone book for the internet, because it allows you to type in, it could be Department of Health, New South Wales, and it will resolve to the Department of Health. Where auDA plays a role, which I think is really important here, is that the domain name, the organisations that, they're not a regulator, but administer the domain name and all the infrastructure that goes into you choosing a domain name to being successful in getting a .com.au domain name, is not just a simple automatic procedure. There's a lot of back-end work that goes to making sure that Australian.au.com.au registrars who you can get the domain names from have a certain level of security, because at every point in that process, there are vulnerabilities. I think it's fair to say that If you're connected to the internet in some way, that introduces an element of vulnerability. So we wanted to help everyone understand what the DNS was, its origins, why it's important. And to Rosemary's point, again, like most things that are intangible, it's out there where you really don't know it matters until you type in rachelscakes.com.au and it resolves nowhere. And what we don't want is a system with a 404 error not found, or in the auDA world, 404 is not a good number string. You don't want anything that doesn't resolve, because what it means in today, particularly with generations far younger than I, that when they tap in and type and you put that name in or you put a search in, it resolves somewhere. And in a world now, we are very impatient for the resolution to websites. The importance of auDA and what we tried to talk about here, and the importance of the DNS in the Australian context, is you want it to resolve to safe and trusted websites. You don't want what comes up in the search engine order to be dodgy websites. And that is why auDA and the whole infrastructure around how you can get a domain name and the security around registrars means that there is less risk of scams and what we'll call malicious sites, because you have to tether your domain name to your business name. And there has to be a legal tethering to that, so that there is less risk of impersonation. So we wanted to talk about the DNS and the role it plays, the importance of where it sits in the World Wide Web, and why it's important to Australia and the Australian economy more broadly. I think we also just wanted to touch on the hierarchy. So we do talk about, for those of you who are very interested in the hierarchy of the DNS, there's a few graphics in there which are helpful, I think, and also the governance of how it's governed and ICANN and the role that ICANN plays. In the paper, we do talk about oversight and the registrars, how auDA accredits its registrars and the security that they have to go through and compliance process they have to go through in order to make sure that they're not the soft underbelly. By that, I mean that if they are targeted and they are attacked or infiltrated in some way, that they can't become a vector for either others to steal data or become known as a registrar that allows domains to be registered that in fact have no tethering or not authentic domains. So we sought to sort of do an overview of that. We talked about a couple of sort of more prominent cyber attacks in that context, and that really auDA's and the DNS play a key role in the broader sort of political, and you've heard the current Home Affairs Minister talk about this, to make Australia the safest place online. It doesn't mean that every domain or everything is not malicious or that this minimises the risk to zero, not at all. But auDA and the role of a safe DNS and safer registrars means that we are a harder target, both in terms of websites that are malicious, but a harder target in terms of the Australian sort of domain context. I stress it does not mean we are not a target. It just means that is a more trusted domain in terms of where they're ranked in terms of phishing and scams and malicious sites. So it's, of course, I'm biased. I'm going to say it's a fabulous read, but it is really an important part of the connected world that we just simply take for granted. And it's not until you get your error 404 or a non-resolving that the plumbing of the internet and the security and everything that's wrapped around that becomes more important. And I'll just finish on Rosemary's point. We do touch very briefly on this about the regulatory sort of underpinnings of having a free internet and one that is not divided up by or dominated by certain jurisdictions that believe it should be governed in certain ways, or having really gates and walls around the internet, because then it becomes a tool that is not allowing for dissemination of information. There is always a degree of regulation, online, offline, and that's regulated. The online world is regulated. But it's important, we just touched on that there is a backdrop at the moment of trying to have certain jurisdictions exert more control. And again, this paper talks about why it's important that in line with democratic countries and principles, we have a safe and secure internet, and the DNS really underpins all that. And on that note, I'll hand back to Rosemary or Jordan. I think Jordan from here.
Yes, thank you, and kia ora everyone. Good morning. It's a delight to be here. I'm going to subject you to a brief death by PowerPoint experience, but I hope that you do not die because there are not many slides, not many words. But thanks for the hand over, Rachel. My job in this discussion is to give you a brief summary of what's in the paper. Rachel's done some of that, and so has Rosemary, so it'll be very brief to give you as much time as possible for questions and comments. And deliberately, we're not talking about everything that's in it. There are a few exciting and interesting bits that you will discover only by reading the paper. So I will suggest a number of times that you do that. Mike, can we just flick to the next slide? I'll talk briefly about the three things that the paper very cleverly signposts in its title. It's about what the DNS is, why it matters, and briefly about how it works, with the caveat that this is not a DNS tutorial. If we flick to the next slide, what it is, and the next. It's at its heart, the DNS is a way to make the internet more friendly for people. It's just easy and it just works. And as others have said, it turns the words that we use, say auda.org.au, into IP addresses, an example of which is shown there in the slide, an IPv4 address. Importantly, it's a global system, with some exceptions that we don't really need to go into. Basically, if you type in a domain name anywhere around the world, the global distributed system that is the DNS will return you an authoritative result that points you to the right internet resources. And so it has enormous economies of scale and network effects built into it. The reason that this is such an important glue for the internet is that everyone uses it and it is mostly reliable. If that was not the case, and that's some of the challenges that the DNS faces from alternative technologies, we'd all be in a much more uncertain online world. And it's that authoritative nature, security, and trust that Rachel and Rosemary talked about that makes it important. Here in Australia, many of us use .au domains. They're getting close to 4.2 million of those at the moment, but there are hundreds of other choices available for people as well. And some of those are discussed in the paper. Many of you on the call, I think, will know some of the others. If we flick through another couple of slides, Mike, why it matters. It's important to realize it isn't just a website address or the right-hand side of an email address. The DNS underpins virtually every system and function relied upon in a digital world. If you look through online applications or services, you'll find domain names and DNS stuff plumbed into the very depths of the services that are available. And if it stopped working tomorrow, there would be all sorts of very unfortunate consequences for all of us. And if we go to the next slide, it's that reliability that I've already talked about. Wherever you are, here, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, or Britain, Malaysia, or Kenya, the domain name you type in will be locatable and will point to the addresses where our servers live. Being able to trust it is critical. And that's why, as others have mentioned, the domain name system has been defined as a critical infrastructure resource here in Australia. And that puts obligations on us here at auDA and on our channel partners, including the registrars, to operate to the highest security standards. And some of the details about what that requires are also set out in the paper. So I will urge you again to take a read. And briefly on how it works, if we flick through to the next slide and the one after, Mike, thank you. There are a couple of key points in the paper that I do want to remind you of before you take a read yourselves. It is globally distributed with a unique global root zone. And in Australia, auDA is responsible for the .au search. So when you type in, if your computer was attaching to a network that hadn't had much to do with the internet and you tried to find a .au name, it might not know it. So it would go up, the query would go up to the global root zone and be pointed to auDA's zone servers. So that's what we talk about, a hierarchy. If it doesn't know, it'll go up to the root, say, where is .au, or where is .com, or where is .uk? And then the root zone points to that next level, to the top level domain. And then you can find the information, your computer can find the information for that domain name directly. And this means that there's no single point of failure. There are hundreds of instances of the root zone all around the world. auDA has many name servers in Australia and internationally to make sure that it's a deeply resilient service. Different sorts of organizations are involved. Some people running country codes are corporations or for-profit orgs. Many are nonprofits like auDA. Sometimes it's government departments that do it. Some of the big generic top-level domains run by multi-billion-dollar corporations. So there's a huge amount of diversity here. And Rachel mentioned ICANN earlier in the talk. This is all a wonderful fabric of cooperation and collaboration organized through the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which doesn't give just the tech companies or just the administrators like auDA or just the governments the right and responsibility to make the policies that apply. It draws all of the stakeholders together, and what we keep using this term of multi-stakeholder internet governance to make sure everyone who's got a stake in the future of this network and keeping it working comes together and has to work together to consensus to drive its future development. I'm going to wrap that there. Please take a look at the paper. You've had it for a few minutes now. Some of you no doubt are adept at listening to a webinar, but actually reading the paper. So you've got the link, and we look forward to the questions and comments that you've got to share with us and each other. Rosemary, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks, Rachel, as well. I've got a couple of questions to start us off in this Q&A part of our webinar, but I'd really like to encourage the audience to keep sending your questions through the Zoom Q&A tab, and we'll get back to those shortly. So I might go to you, Rachel, first. The internet, as we've described it, is a global system, and that really means that the threats can come to us from anywhere in the world. In your role, where do you think Australia should focus our efforts to achieve that objective that the Minister has set out of us being one of the safest connected places on the planet?
Yes, thanks, Rosemary. I think, look, obviously at the moment, given what's going on, we're all acutely aware of cyber incidents and how often our data is not in our own control. So I think the first thing is cyber security more generally has really been elevated at a corporate level in the last few weeks in a way that I've never seen before. So I think Australia and the corporate Australia certainly, if they haven't had a focus on it, I certainly have a focus on it now. And I think the AICD Directors Sentiment Survey said it's one of the top 5 things that keeps directors, probably now even in the number 1 or 2 that keep directors awake at night. So I think it's definitely organisations understanding their cyber environment, and by that I mean their digital environment, having an understanding of audit of what they have, what data they have, systems, and the security wrapped around them. But I think also it's not just a government's responsibility for Australia to keep Australia safe. There are things that consumers and small businesses can do. And even though as consumers, we have very little choice often but to give details in order to get a service, I think Australian businesses more broadly probably are now in a position where they need to revise policies they have, which sometimes may not be rooted in anything other than we just need to do something because somebody's told us. But I think it's for all of us in Australia in the business sense to look at what data we're collecting and whether we need to collect it and what that can mean for hopefully for our customers and companies, but as individuals also where we can and have a choice not to give data, to not give that data. So for example, if you go into a shop and they want you to sign up to their loyalty program, you don't have to give your date of birth. It's a really simple, small thing. And I think that more and more customers are becoming alive to, they don't actually have to give, they don't even have to be in the loyalty program. I'm often embarrassing my kids by when I'm asked those questions in a retail setting, just going, no, I'm not, either I say, I don't live here or I don't need to be part of your loyalty program. Because remembering that in that program, there's something there for them. It's not a freebie for them. You become the product. So I think that's what, at a more sort of consumer level. I think the policy settings, obviously government have indicated, the Minister has indicated they'll be doing a new cyber security strategy I think everything's on the table at the moment, from policy settings to whether our legislation's right, and a whole bunch of things to harden Australia in other ways. But I think the ACSC's website has a lot of really good information going, and making sure that you have trusted domains, and you're constantly also just checking things in your settings so that your domains can't be spoofed and things like that. There's a lot in there for businesses, and there's a lot in there generally to keep your business secure. But I think as more and more things are digital and we are marching towards an even more digital world, we all have a role, from us as individuals, teaching our children as parents, but as consumers, right through to small and big business, and ultimately government, in making sure the legislative and policy settings are just right for a very dynamic and ever-moving kind of threat landscape.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting point that you make, that we should all start thinking about managing our own data before we hand it over, instead of hoping that someone else is managing it once we've given it away. A very important message. So if we could go, Jordan, from that example around the global internet and some of the things we have to be concerned about. You mentioned the multi-stakeholder model and how that underpins how the internet's governed, but yet it's a model under threat. What would it mean if the multi-stakeholder model broke down in terms of the security of the internet?
Good question, Rosemary. The system follows the way that it's governed. So multi-stakeholder model isn't like an odd bolt-on that doesn't really matter. The technologies that make up the internet are developed and nurtured through those processes. And the key thing that makes it different to alternatives, which are almost always government inspired multilateral processes, is that the decisions are made on their merits about how the technology will affect an open, secure global internet. And they're made by the people who are experts in the area. So it isn't a bunch of diplomats sitting around in Geneva or New York, opining on something that was in a memo they read from their communications ministry or something. It's actually people with deep expertise and knowledge getting together to have the hard conversations about shaping the technology stack and how it works. So if you take that expertise away, if you replace that decision-making framework with another one where geopolitical concerns might come to the fore, it's almost guaranteed to lead to a sort of less successful and harmonious web of cooperation that is the internet than we have today. I don't think if you compared the way the United Nations works or its obvious total success in driving peace and prosperity for everyone, that was ironic, by the way, with the actual proven success of the internet in being a fabric that works all around the world, that there's really any contest. So it isn't just an abstraction, it has really practical impact on the success and the ability of the network to evolve. And that's why it's something that we are so focused on protecting and treasuring.
Terrific. Thanks, Jordan. And I might just check with Mike how we're going with the audience Q&A.
Thanks, Rose. We've had a couple of questions come in, but so I might just chuck one in the mix for the moment. Yeah. That's right. We had a question coming about why the DNS is considered critical infrastructure when the use of search engines is so prevalent. So I don't know if that's a good one for Rachel or Jordan to jump in with.
I'm happy for Jordan to take that, Rosemary.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a go. I think what people don't realise is that the DNS is actually the way you find your way through the internet. So you're using, for example, Google, and the way you find Google is google.com. So you're not using .au part of the DNS, but you're using the global DNS. And I think that's what Rachel was saying. This is kind of the silent underpinning that enables us to do all sorts of things that we do without even thinking about it. So Facebook's another example. You actually are going to facebook.com. Once you get to facebook.com, you might be getting all sorts of information about Australian restaurants, Australian events, Australian shopping experiences, and that then takes you into the .au part of the DNS. But all of this is happening so seamlessly and so easily because all you're putting in is, I'm interested in eating green asparagus tonight. And back comes, a number of places where you can go and explore all of that. It's that ease and trust that the DNS enables. Don't know if Rachel or Jordan would like to add anything.
Just really briefly, that it's also one step removed. Sure, there's like the retail use of a domain name where you type it in or where you use it in an email. But if you said to Google, hey, we're going to take away the DNS, they would be tearing their hair out. Their own services wouldn't work. All the big cloud services wouldn't work. All of the interactions of online internet services wouldn't work. All of the interactions between things like your online banking apps communicating back with the systems that the banks run wouldn't work. So that's why if there's one thing you could take away from you from this, from my point of view, please understand that the DNS is critical to the fabric of the online world that we live in. It isn't just, oh, well, people use search engines these days, so we don't need it. That's a misapprehension of the importance of this fabric. And I say that just to challenge you to know that, because it's a very commonly held view, but it isn't the right one.
Thank you both for that. There is one more question in the queue to go through. The probably another one for you. Just some clarification of the difference between .au direct as a namespace versus the .com.org and net.au.
Well, the point is that they are just different namespaces. So in .au domain, so I'm going to make it slightly more complex before I simplify it, I hope. So in our .au domain, we offer a number of different namespaces that are suitable for different purposes. And com.au is an absolutely wonderful namespace for established businesses. Australian consumers identify com.au as a very trusted namespace. So if you're wanting to transact with customers and do business over the internet, then com.au is an absolutely fabulous place to be. If you're an organisation, a charity, a community organisation, very well established and registered with an ACN, then org.au is a great place to be, or a not-for-profit like auDA, auda.org.au. .au Direct is offering another choice of namespaces. It's designed for the mobile environment in which we're all working at the moment. And it's also designed to support innovation, the kind of innovation that we're seeing in our digital economy. All of that was taken into account through a long process of consultation about whether and how to introduce .au Direct. Those decisions were taken and .au Direct was introduced in March this year. We were really pleased to see the uptake of the names because that demonstrates that the role that we thought .au Direct would play in the Australian economy and in Australian society, we were right about that, and the uptake has just been fabulous. But it's all about choice and innovation. It's a new namespace within the .au domain.
Thanks, Rosemary. The questions are now beginning to flow in, so I might continue on with them through the Q&A if that works with everyone. We just had a question about the target audience of the paper and how it will be marketed. I know that's one for Rachel to pick up first instance.
Sure, thanks. That's a good question. So I think anyone who obviously wants to have a bit of a read about the DNS, but largely policymakers, people here in Canberra, but also state governments, but really policymakers around, and potentially politicians and staff as well, just so that they can have a better understanding of the internet and the sort of the plumbing of the internet. So it's been, as the paper notes, we sort of say it's not really understood well, the DNS and sort of the plumbing. We talk about that, and we talk about the importance for the business and public to also understand it as well. So that was the main focus of the paper.
If I might just add something, Mike, and then Jordan might also want to chime in on this one. It seems from auDA's point of view that as we are really now transforming into a digital economy, it's really important that people who are thinking about the policy and regulatory support that such an economy needs really have a working understanding of the underpinnings of that digital economy. How does that economy work is really basic information when thinking about how the economy should be supported, innovation encouraged, and harms dealt with. So we see it as providing that picture of it's complex technology to operate and deliver, but it can be explained in simple terms so that people understand the impacts and implications. And in that context, it's also really important to understand the multi-stakeholder processes, because those processes can be very effective. They're global, and on certain occasions can produce really good results really quickly. And just by way of a quick example, just this morning, we've seen correspondence from ICANN where the registrars and registries are saying to ICANN, we want you to think about contractual obligations in regard to DNS abuse management. And we think the time has come to reflect the increased effort that we're all putting into this, such that everybody in the DNS community adopts those stances and has those obligations. So that is, to my way of thinking, a terrific example of the advantage of the multi-stakeholder process, where the experts that Jordan was talking to get to a point of saying, we all ought to be doing this, let's reflect it in contracts. So there's a bit of work to be done yet, but I thought it was a very interesting example. Jordan.
Just really briefly, generally the issues that tech generally shows up, policymakers are quite knowledgeable about these days. But it seems to me that the DNS is sometimes a little bit more of a sort of backroom area where it isn't seen as something that is as pervasive as it is, and it's just kind of assumed that it will work. And so I think part of the audience here is policymakers who may not know they needed to know about this in order to be able to account for its reality in the thinking that they do. And I think it's part of a broader effort that we will be undertaking in the next few years of trying to connect this internet governance stuff a little bit more tightly with the broader digital policy debate, because it would be good for that broader debate to be well informed about the internet's reality, and be good to shape the internet's development in response to the needs of that broader technology debate. So I hope it's an entree into an ongoing dialogue where people go, oh yeah, so when we can come to the point where we know that policymaking in Australia in the tech area is really grounded on a great understanding of how the internet and these underlying techs work as well. I think that's part of what this is in aid of.
Thank you for that. We just had a question come in about cyber security as well, and particular given the high profile attacks, whether Australia is a target specifically at the moment. So I don't know whether Rachel, you wanted to kick off on that.
Sure, happy to. No more than any other country that's connected to the internet in the world. No, I don't think Australia is, apart from being a prosperous country, is any more a target than any other prosperous country. The real target is data, the value of data, and volume of data that is attractive for cyber criminals, and the ability potentially to access that data. So it's it's a numbers game for cyber criminals. They will go and basically knock on a lot of doors or try and push them open, and it's just whether they're successful in being able to breach that organisation's sort of cyber perimeter is important. But I don't think Australia is any more of a target than any other of the Five Eyes countries or any other prosperous nation. What makes us a target is, like every other country, rich caches of data, and that's everywhere. And as we've said before, you know, everyone moves online. Everyone post-COVID, particularly, organisations have fast-tracked digital transformations often. So really, it's just unfortunately, more and more is put online that would otherwise have either not been created or stored in a filing cabinet 20 years ago. So if you're connected to the internet, you're already a target. And if you've got valuable data, that makes you more of a target, and volume as well. So it's an unfortunate combination, but it can happen to large organisations across the world, sadly.
Thank you for that. Unless anyone else wanted to add any further, that's all the questions we have in the queue at the moment, Rosemary. So I don't have any more of your own to conclude.
Yeah, I've just got one. I'd like to go back to Jordan for a moment. I think you've done a great job, Jordan, explaining to us why the governance model of the internet is so important to the ease and trust that we all have when we're using the internet. And I just wondered whether you've got ideas about how we can drive more engagement and greater interest from the community and the government on this particular topic of how the internet is governed.
A few. One is to really connect the discussions in the way that I mentioned before. If you talk about internet governance and say that internet governance is really important, you must all pay much attention to it, you can be at risk of achieving glazed eyes. And I'm going to go and talk about something more exciting. And so you have to always connect the relevance of the topic. So talking more about, people have coined a phrase like digital political economy, or technology governance, where the internet stuff is an underpinning, but it matters because of its contribution to and interactions with the broader things people care about: online health services, online education opportunities, the experience that we all went through in massively shifting ourselves online when the COVID-19 pandemic arrived. So I think the obligation is on us who want to stir up that debate and discussion and broaden that community engagement to make sure that we're talking about the issues that matter to people, and connecting our areas of concern with it. And I actually think there's another layer to that, which is that the way that the internet governance system, organizations like ICANN and so on, is built, is designed to do that very narrow job of dealing with critical internet resources. And the internet, as we've got today, is throwing up all sorts of challenges, the cyber security challenges that we've been talking about, and the multi-stakeholder processes that are meant that could help tackle that don't really exist, because it wasn't designed to. It was just designed to deal with the names and numbers and the technology. So if we want to be able to play a useful contribution here in Australia to getting government to tackle those things in a sensible way, then another part of what we can do as an organization and as a community of people interested in this stuff is to convene and hold those debates in a really nice, informed way, so that when something bad happens and the government needs to rush to respond in the public interest, there's already a corpus of work and dialogue that's happened on whatever the ticklish policy areas are, so that no one needs to fly blind. So I think it's about connecting the discussion more closely with the things that matter, and then having the dialogues in a broad community-based way in advance. So when things need to happen, there's already a bit of thinking that's been done.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Jordan. And very unhappily, we've got to bring this particular dialogue to a close because we're fast running out of time. So let me, on behalf of everybody, thank Jordan and Rachel for joining us. And also a big shout out to the Cyber Security CRC team, who worked very hard to produce the report. It's great work. We'll be distributing the report by email, and of course it's also available on both the auDA and Cyber Security CRC websites. and they're very easy to find, as you now know. I'd like to finish with two little messages. The first is, if you're not a member, I'd really like to encourage you to sign up as a .au member. It's a free membership, and it will mean that you too can be part of the ongoing dialogue, take part in the work we do and events such as today. If you are a member, then a quick reminder that voting by members for elected director candidates closes at 5 p.m. on the 14th of November. So if you haven't voted yet, please do so. Next Thursday, we'll be holding another webinar to launch our second annual Digital Lives of Australians report, and we'll be looking at what Australians are saying about cybersecurity in that report and webinar. We have a member event in December, and details about that and .au membership are on the website. So thank you once again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you soon.